Welcome and thank you to everyone joining us today. We have two outstanding guests for a conversation that I know everyone is going to, I think, both appreciate, enjoy, and learn from. We have Dean Somerset and Dan Pope. A little background on the two of them. Dan is a physical therapist and strength coach with over 20 years experience helping athletes return to play pain-free, and is the owner of Fitness Pain-Free, a continuing education company that has helped thousands of other coaches and clinicians learn how to help their own clients. He has been a CrossFit regional qualifier, a strongman national champion, and was a collegiate pole vaulter. Dean is a personal trainer and certified exercise physiologist who specializes in post-rehabilitation fitness. He has worked with clients recovering from joint replacements, sports injuries, spinal cord injuries, cancer, and cardiac surgery, in addition to healthy individuals working toward their own individual goals. He has developed and taught courses around the world on rehab, mobility, hip and shoulder health, and core training, and has written for publications like Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, Men's Journal, Bodybuilding.com, T Nation. He's presented for the NSCA and canfitpro and is a contributor to Developing the Course, 2nd edition, NSCA's Essentials of Personal Training, 3rd edition, and the newest one that we're going to talk about today, co-authored by Dan and Dean, Rock Solid Resilience. So I'm really excited about this one. I thank you both so much for your time and for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thank
Glad
you.
to be here.
Same as Dean.
That was a lot right there, but I wanted to, highlight your accomplished careers to this point, and want to give everyone, I guess, perspective on your expertise. So now that we know that part, though, I'm always interested in how you got your start in this particular field, like why this interested in both of you.
Yeah.
Dan,
Dean,
do you want
to
to
start? Oh, oh
Right.
boy. I guess I'll start. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Well, I know Dean's kind of got the same background somewhat, but I was kind of born and bred at Meathead. Always loved strength, always loved fitness. I went to school at Rutgers University, studied exercise science. I was the guy that was getting all my buddies together so we could do Westside Barbell workouts in my dad's greenhouse, because that was the only place we could set things up. And we were taking change from the farm, and we wouldn't have change or even weight. They'd be rusty. One would be 20 pounds, one would be like 15, and we'd still try to use it on the bar. Just like classic Meathead stuff. And then when I finished college and started up with personal training, I just found that I had so many clients that would hurt. And one of the big issues is that I would try to send them to a physical therapist, right? Let's say I had low back pain. They go to the physical therapist, and they come back to me and they say, hey, I figured out why we got hurt. You shouldn't be deadlifting. That's how I hurt my back, right? And I have another client, shoulder pain, send them to the physical therapist. They come back, say, guess what hurt my shoulder? I wasn't supposed to bench press. And then after a while, I just kind of realized that maybe I wasn't using the best physical therapist, right? But the other thing I realized is that there's not a physical therapist who are kind of aligned with people that enjoy strength and fitness. And there's just a tremendous amount of benefits to strength training, weightlifting, right? So I just kind of went down that rabbit hole of trying to help these individuals as best as I can. That's where we're at today.
And for me, I was growing up, I played every sport under the sun, and I was terrible at all of them. So I figured I wanted to try and get better at sports. So what's the best way to do that? You read a book. It's really not the best way to do it. So I tried to read as much as I could and skipped practice more than not, and got injured a lot. So that kind of, how do I recover and rehab my own injuries? Got into a kinesiology degree, finished that, and had no idea how to train people. And similar to Dan, I got working with individuals who had shoulder injuries, back injuries, all that kind of stuff, and then had to figure out how to work with those individuals. Contacted a lot of physical therapists, chiropractors, doctors, and we worked collaboratively to try to figure out what would work best for those individuals. And from that, just kept learning, kept expanding. Then got a chance to meet cool people like Dan, who were actually tuned in to strength and conditioning and actually saying, yeah, you should deadlift to fix your back pain. You should bench press to fix your shoulder pain. Here's how to do it.
So I think those are both interesting stories, good stories, but something that I want to ask then, considering both of your backgrounds, when you got into this and realized that you were going to work with injured athletes or injured, maybe it's Gen Pop What was one of the things that caught you off guard first in maybe working with some of those initial clients? Maybe something that you weren't prepared for initially.
I think the biggest one was when people say, "Oh, I hurt my ankle, I can't train today," or "I hurt my neck or my shoulder, I can't train today." There's a lot of things that you should be doing when it comes to training, and even if you have an injury. Let's say you like ripped your ankle off the bone and you're out of surgery or out of whatever. You can still train your other two arms. You can still train your other leg. You can still train core. You can still do conditioning work. You can still stay active, and that's going to have a positive impact on the recovery of the injury. But there's a lot of people who use it almost as a, well, this is sore, therefore I shouldn't train at all. Meanwhile, the best thing to do with a lot of it is trying to figure out how to actually get into the zone to train through that. Somebody's saying that Dan looks like prime Aaron Rodgers. That's amazing.
Nice.
I saw that.
Not me.
Yeah.
Right.
If only you had his bank account, right?
Right.
I know. Yeah, it's pretty good. I guess, similar to Dean, I honestly didn't know anything about pain and injury. And what I always find funny is that when I started as a personal trainer, it's almost like pain is not supposed to be the realm of personal training whatsoever. It's kind of like personal trainers are taught to put their head in the sand, and if someone has pain, go see a physical therapist, go see a doctor. And I think that is probably the right way to go. But the problem is that you work with people every single day of the week that have pain. And if you had to avoid pain every single day, you probably wouldn't have a business. So it's just not reasonable. So I just kind of went on a journey to try to figure out what is okay. Is it okay to push through pain? Is it not okay to push through pain? What's appropriate? What's not? Now I have a little bit more ability to push into pain with my patients because I am a physical therapist. Obviously, it's what I do for a living. But I think for the regular trainee as well as personal trainers, they have to know a few things about pain, right? Have to know if it's okay to work through some, I have to avoid it 100%, right? Can I still squat when my knee hurts? Can I deadlift when my back hurts? So just having some parameters there. And it was a big trial and error kind of issue for me, which I do not recommend if you're trying to work with a population with a really mad back, just figuring it out on the fly. But at the time, there was no information that existed out there on how to do this. So that's why I just felt really, I don't know, felt like it was really important for me to try to figure some of this stuff out and then to share this information, with the world. So
Something that I think is interesting is that when I started training, I thought I only wanted to train athletes. Ended up with like a 70-year-old client, and noticed that she was having like hip issues, like shoulder issues, that type of thing. And anyway, I guess the point of this is like, as I went along, I realized that older populations ended up with the same kind of issues that my younger athletes did, maybe just for different reasons. So I know there are a lot of reasons that injuries can happen, but from your practice and experience, are there factors that contribute more than others, would you say?
yeah. Do you want to start, Dean? You want me to go with this one?
Yeah, I'll take the lead on it. Big thing to consider is that the structure and function are the same, whether you're 20 or whether you're 70. Positive adaptations occur at the same rates in the same design. The only difference between the two is what are they looking to do it for and what are their outcome measures. So for somebody like a pro baseball player, they want to throw fast and they want to be able to throw for a full game and then recover and do it again. For somebody who's in their 60s who wants to play pickleball and chase their grandkids around, that is their competitive sport. So we're training them as an athlete using the same principles, the same structure, the same function, the same approaches, but we're just doing it with slightly different intensities, slightly different volumes, slightly different warm-ups, slightly different ways of going about it. But they're still individuals. Like every person that walks in the door is an athlete. We just have to figure out what sport it is they're playing.
Yeah, for sure. I think the easiest explanation could be overuse, right? Although I don't think that's entirely accurate. But the second piece is that I don't think this is simple, and that's unfortunate, right? And I think one of the big problems you see in the social media world and kind of like gym culture is that people want to place the blame on one specific thing. Technique sometimes gets the blame, and sometimes technique is a player, right? But there are a lot of different variables, and I think it's unfair to not discuss them for the average person who wants to prevent injury. Because if they think, I've heard so many people say like, I don't know why I hurt my back, my deadlift technique was on par. It's like, okay, well, that's one parameter of a multitude of things that could have caused an injury. So just quickly off the top of my head, technique I do think is a player, but also volume. So how much total stress you're throwing at your body, how prepared you are for that, your prior history of injuries, your psychology, your recovery, stress levels, diet. There's a lot of things to go into it. And one of the big things I want to try to accomplish in this book with Dean is just to get those ideas out there so people can start thinking about that from an injury prevention standpoint, and then just coming up with some practical ways they can take those principles and apply it to their own training.
I think something that goes along with this, and I think maybe a lot of people think of this in terms of athletes, but it could be any population, any, I guess, age of individual, is that acute chronic workload ratio. And I know you guys talk about that specifically in the book. I know this could happen with a number of different scenarios. Like I said, I usually see it at the beginning of maybe a sports season, maybe an athlete hasn't trained and kind of jump into it. So I guess if you guys could explain, like, how does this happen and what are some of the reasons that this leads to injury?
I can jump in first if you want. So when I first started training, the gym I worked at was a squash club. So there was a lot of squash courts around, plus the gym in the center. And in the summer, everyone would play golf. And in the fall, everyone would switch from golf into squash. So there was always, every season, a rash of Achilles ruptures in the first 2 weeks of people coming back into playing squash, because they went right from doing nothing but golf and walking and having beers on the course to playing a very ballistic, dynamic, explosive sport with no lead in, no build up. And these are guys in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have tendons that could only be resemblant of like worn out shock absorbers. And they haven't given themselves times to build up that elasticity and that responsiveness. And they get into a game, don't do any warm up on their own, and boom, the Achilles goes. So that's kind of a prime example of people not managing training load and intensity and explosiveness properly. These are individuals that were underloading those tendons and not prepared for the actual sport they were getting into. Now, as the season would roll on, you would see everyone start complaining of soreness in their hips, soreness in their Achilles, soreness in their shoulder, because they would just play squash all the time. So they went from doing nothing to full gas effort all the time. So for those individuals, there was no ramping up of intensity to get them ready for play and no recovery focus whatsoever. Most recovery after a game of squash is a pint of beer. So for those individuals, that like, it just changing that culture, it didn't occur. So it was one of those kind of things where it gave a really clear example in front of you of how important it is to manage training volume, training stress, and make sure that you're able to fluctuate as you go through a training season, building it up properly throughout the start of the season to get you ready to play, and then managing recovery throughout the season so that when you have long tournaments, you're not feeling like you're completely demolished by the end of the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. I think that answer is great, Dean. I guess to add a little bit, I think it really depends on the kind of capacity of the individual. So for example, you have tennis elbow, right? You can have an elite tennis player get tennis elbow. Let's say they spike their volume. They do a lot more than they usually do. All of a sudden their elbow starts hurting. I also have, 6-year-old women, they garden a little hard on the weekend and now they got tennis elbow. Like the forces on the elbow are very different in each example, but the thought process is if you're not prepared for whatever activity you're kind of throwing at your body, more likely to get hurt. So I think it becomes very, very important that you have a slow ramp into any activity you want to start. And it's a little bit sad to hear this, but certain activities in sports, your likelihood of getting injured is higher in the first year of participation. So sometimes we like to think like a week or two of kind of getting ready. Sometimes that's not enough, right? The better you can prepare for something, the better. And then the other part is consistency. I think this is one of the big places where you see folks get into trouble, right? Let's say you go on vacation, don't work out for a week, and you come back, you kind of hit it full bore, right? Let's say you're busy and stressed out in life, you don't have much time to go to the gym, and all of a sudden you start doing more, right? I think the other part is you start throwing stress in the mix. You have some folks that maybe they are pretty consistent with their training, but they have, let's say they're a student, they have like big exams coming up. All of a sudden you have the stress of the exams and you're trying to train at the same degree. Plus you have poor sleep because you're studying. And I would say that that's not an acute to chronic workload spike in the traditional sense, but you probably are spiking the amount of strain on your body. And we do have research to show you're more likely to get hurt. So I think just getting folks to think in those terms can be helpful for them to make smarter training decisions.
I think you touched on right there what I was going to follow up. Like, so for you guys, is it just more about consistency and creating good habits so you don't have to worry about like ramping up, I guess, and just kind of making that a routine? Is
Go ahead, Dean. I know you're chomping at the bit for this one.
it?
So part of it's building habits, but then it's also part of identifying what's going on. So like if you have a rough night's sleep or you just got off a transcontinental flight, you should probably step back your training a little bit. It's something where just identifying, okay, these things happened. I need to be able to adapt as I go forward. Being able to monitor your training program and saying, okay, the last couple of weeks I've been adding into my training program, more volume, more intensity. So I should probably have a week where I deload for a little bit or ease up a little bit. You can only add to it so long. And there's a great saying, I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was me, I don't know. The challenge with testing your limits is eventually you find out. And if people are always pushing and always challenging and always trying to figure out how much more they can add, eventually they figure out where their limit is and they find out the hard way.
Yeah, pain is a great professor, right? You get an injury, you learn something, hopefully. I guess to get a little more granular, let's talk about, let's say, weight training. We know that, let's say, the deadlift places a good amount of strain on your back. And Dean kind of said this, but I can't tell you how many folks I've seen hurt themselves deadlifting. And I love deadlifting. And when folks come in to see me and they want to get back to deadlifting, the back hurts, I deadlift with them generally, but we usually have to use some sort of modification. So I would say that a deadlift is kind of an at-risk movement for low back pain. As much as I love it, I think that folks do get hurt from time to time with it. So that total volume comes into play. We want to make sure that we're not throwing too much at your body. Some of the popular powerlifting programs nowadays are having folks deadlift 1, 2, 3 days a week. And if you kind of grew up in the West Side era, that's just like heresy. Like those folks like never deadlifted. They just did maybe good mornings once a week, super heavy. So this higher volume stuff is sometimes challenging for folks' backs. And I'll often back these guys off to 1, maybe 2 times a week of deadlifting. And it's much more reasonable for them, right? The second piece is they need to stay consistent, because if you're used to deadlifting, let's say twice a week for a period of time, and then you get away from that, when you go back to twice a week, you have to be cautious because you're doubling your training volume again. So for some of those movements, I think we have to be careful with the total volume, but we also have to be very, very consistent just to make sure we're not running into problems from the acute to chronic workload perspective.
Yeah, that's, I guess, all good points. Like not only consistency, but it sounds like just having more balance in your life so that you're not overtraining, but also not completely going silent on that. You guys have both kind of touched on this already, but I know you devote a full chapter in the book to auto-regulation. And so I guess for maybe some people aren't familiar with that term, maybe they're kind of new to this. Can you kind of explain what auto-regulation is, what it means, and why it's so important?
Go for it, Dean.
That's always trying to figure out like who's going to go.
Yeah.
So auto-regulation at its core is how do you adjust your training on the fly based on what you're seeing, what you're feeling. So if you come into the gym and you feel like you absolutely are going to crush it, you got your pre-workout going, you got the right mix music, you walk into the gym feeling 10 feet tall and bulletproof, that means you're probably going to do different things in the gym than if you feel like you're just dragging yourself into the gym, eyes half open, barely able to move your arms, barely able to get your legs going. Those two examples are things that are going to have very different workout parameters. So knowing how to adjust your workout based on how you feel, and also what is your performance looking like in the set. So if you're doing a deadlift and that bar is flying off the floor during your warm-up and it's moving way faster and way easier than you would expect, you might be able to put more weight on the bar today than you were thinking. Likewise, if the bar feels like it's being held to the ground by magnets and it's not going anywhere, that might be a day to say, you know what, today's not my day. I'm going to adjust and reduce volume, reduce load, make sure I get quality work in, but make sure I'm not trying to push a number that's unattainable for today. So learning how to adjust your training based on how you're feeling and what the parameters for that would be. So we talk about things like RPE, rate of perceived exertion, reps in reserve, how many reps do you figure you could do at the end of the set? We talk about things like velocity-based training, but also just like qualitative measures. How do you actually feel? Do you feel like you're being productive in the gym? Do you feel like you're actually getting a good quality workout in? Does it feel like it's something productive to you? Or do you feel like it's so far advanced and you're just not ready today? they have to just punch the clock and say you did something today, even if it wasn't world breaking or world beating type stuff. So knowing how to adjust your training and giving yourself permission to adjust the plan to be able to do things that are meeting you where you're at this moment. That's kind of the big thing about auto-regulation.
Yeah. And also to get a little more specific, some things I think Dean and I are both fans of using a training journal, because at the end of the day, we want to be able to track some of these variables. And I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to do it. So when you walk in the gym that day, there's a few things you can write down, and that'll give you an idea of what you need to modify. So a few of those, and we have some cool research to support this, but just ranking the amount of stress you feel like you have, your perception of how stressed you are on a scale of 0 to 3. And if you're more stressed than you typically are, you might have to back off a little bit. I'm also a fan of counting calories, right? Essentially, if you're under fueling for your training, you probably shouldn't be pushing super hard. And I would say this kind of goes for higher level athletes more than like the average sedentary person, but I think it's still a very important parameter. Sleep is another very easy one. It's going to be really important. So, hey, you're getting 7+ hours of sleep. And I think this goes for the prior night, but also in the weeks leading up. Have you been really stressed out and undersleeping, right? Do you deserve to push hard today? This is sometimes a problem for folks because exercise is a stress reliever. If you're just stressed to the max, sometimes you want to go super hard. We know that's sometimes a recipe for disaster. And in terms of what you end up decreasing for that day, I think it really depends on what your most important goals are. So let's say you're a power lifter and it's very important that you hit a top set, right? So you want to make sure you're working up to, let's say 405 for 5 on the squat. Then maybe you hit that, but you reduce the total amount of sets you have of squats that day, or maybe you back off slightly accessory exercises, back off somewhere to reduce that strain on your body, but you try to maintain the most important thing in your training program. On the flip side, maybe volume is more important for you. You're a bodybuilder. Maybe you drop that the RPE, or increase the rep in reserve slightly. Whatever you need to do to maintain your goals as much as possible, but also to reduce some of the strain, right? Okay. And I think I see this all the time. That's what I do for a living. We see people that I call it yo-yoing. So essentially, they kind of push. They get an injury, right? And then what happens is they can't do as much, and they get a lot worse. And then they start to rehab a little bit. They get better. They start to push too hard in the gym. And then they get hurt again, and they go back down again. So one of my thoughts generally for folks is how can we reduce that total amount of strain slightly so you don't keep getting hurt over and over again, and maybe your progress won't be as fast, but over the long term, there's less of these ups and downs, and you make more consistent progress. And that's that whole idea of having longevity in obviously any weight training sport, but also just training for long-term health. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess something that made me think of there is probably just like the outside stressors that all of us will experience. Like if you're a student athlete, maybe you have finals and you don't understand why you're not able to deadlift the same amount that you did the previous week, but you're not considering all those other factors that go into it. And I mean, everyone has different types of stressors in their life.
Absolutely. So, and even outside of the student athletes, the more mature athletes that you might train, they might have young kids. They might have a boss that's breathing down their neck. They might have an upcoming time change. Like just even something like the spring ahead time change messes everyone up usually for a good 3 to 5 days. And it's usually not something significant. It's just an hour, but a time change can be a major effect for a lot of people. And it's something that it doesn't do much to change the amount of sleep that you get, but it just changes your circadian clock just enough to be annoying for everybody for a few days. I still don't know why we do this. Why are we still stuck in this pattern of spring ahead fallback? There's no benefit to it. There hasn't been for like 70 years. Why is this happening? We got to stop doing this. It's wrecking our training gains.
Right. Exactly. Is that something you guys see in your own practice? Maybe from, people that have to travel, like fly across the country, across the world all the time, and they're not taking those factors into account?
Yeah, I've got a couple of clients that are in flights where like they're either pilots or stewards or stewardesses or somebody that's involved in travel or deliveries, and their clocks are messed up. They're the kind of people who at the drop of the hat, they can sleep anywhere, but it sucks. And the people who work shift work in healthcare, their clocks are all over the place too. I'll get people coming in after they did a 12-hour shift at like 9 a.m. or people that are just getting ready to go in for a shift at 4 p.m. And it's one of those things where their clocks, they've done the studies on it, and people that do those kind of shift works, their life expectancy is reduced compared to the people that don't do shift work. All other factors combined, like working split shifts or different variable shifts, has a massive impact on your life, on your quality of life, your training, all that kind of stuff. So when they come into the gym, I got to eyeball them during their warm-ups and be like, okay, well, what are we going to do today? Are you actually like a vibrating, caffeinated mess? Or do you look like you're barely able to get moving? Or are you kind of hit and miss where it's like, I want you to move your left leg, and they move their right leg. I want you to move your left leg. No, and they move their right leg. Okay, just squat, just up and down, right? So we might have to put training wheels on the workout. We might have to really dumb it down. We might have to make it just check the boxes and do movements. We might be able to set personal bests. Every workout is going to be a little bit different, and some days you're going to have it, some days you're not, and we just have to adjust as we go.
Yeah, and just to add kind of the rehab side of it, when I have a patient, and one just comes to mind, I have my schedule right now, that they travel multiple days throughout the course of the week, they have an injury, we know they're going to be stressed out, they're not going to be consistent with their sleep, they're not going to be consistent with the equipment they have, right? It's just tough because in my mind, I'm like, oh, hope they get better, you know? I think sometimes we kind of expect our bodies just to be able to heal and recover, but we have to allow it to recover. So if we're not eating appropriately, fueling appropriately, sleeping appropriately, reducing the amount of strain in our lives, then oftentimes our pain sticks around. Yeah. And there is a pretty cool link between sleep and pain, not only increasing your risk of injury, but the folks that sleep well also tend to get out of pain faster. And the daily fluctuations in sleep affect your pain levels from day to day as well. So it's kind of crazy how tightly correlated those things are. And if you have someone that's just traveling and they're not consistent with their sleep and they're messing with their time zones, that is definitely going to make it hard, without a doubt. So it's just tough.
I'm glad you guys included all of that in the book here, because I think that's something maybe people look at the physical side of it, but they don't consider how that extra stress, lack of sleep, their nutrition, all contributes to that, and how that might lead to injury at some point. So so we do everything that we can to I guess prevent injury or reduce the risk of injury, but sometimes they happen. So what are some ways that you can work around injuries? I know, Dean, you mentioned a little bit at the top, but what are some ways that we can work around injuries through the rehab process to continue training?
Can we do this one, Dean? I feel like
jump in.
You haven't been letting me talk first this entire time. I think the idea, and I'm a physical therapist, so for me, I can be a little bit more cavalier in my application, stealing a term from Chris Johnson there, of exercise and push through a little bit more pain. But I think the goal is when you're training, as long as you have a good training program, you want to try to maintain that program as much as possible when you're injured, but we still have to respect that injury, right? Let's say you have squats that day and your hip is bothering you. You may find that back squats, as you start to approach the working sets, don't feel good, right? And by don't feel good, I mean it just hurts. You have pain, it doesn't feel good. So we can do a variety of things. So we can reduce the load a little bit. We can increase repetitions maybe that you're doing. We can change that RPE, right? We can slow down the movement. And if those things aren't working, we can also change the modification of the movement. Maybe try a front squat, puts a little less strain on the hip. Maybe do a box squat, which again puts less strain on the hip because we're not squatting quite as deep. All else fails, we can try some sort of lunge variation. So maybe we're not squatting for the day like we want to. We're still training our lower body. And two good things happen when you do this appropriately. So one, if you push through pain, and we've all been guilty of this, right? Like, oh my gosh, my back hurts, but I really want to get through the set. I'm going to give it a go. Generally speaking, you get out on the other side and your pain goes away eventually and you feel pretty good, right? But sometimes you get hurt, and that happens more often than not. So I think you're just rolling the dice whenever this happens, because we know that if you have a current injury that's not that bad, if you work through it, you're more likely to get a worse injury, right? And if we modify appropriately, we're still working towards our training goals, at least somewhat. We're also respecting the healing injury, and we're applying stress to it that can help it rehab at the same time. And that's that kind of win-win situation I'm looking for as much as possible, folks. Because it happens all the time, particularly as you age. You go to the gym like, whoa, what's going on with my elbow today? It just feels off, right? Yeah. And I tell you what, if you push through that, you're just playing with fire. But if you make a smart modification, allows you to train comfortably, doesn't really affect your long-term training whatsoever. So it's always important to do that. Make those modifications when you can.
Yeah. And a big part of it's also understanding, like, what are you feeling when you go into things? So there's a lot of difference between, like, a sharp, stabby nerve, burny type pain, and a cranky tendon that needs to warm up. So Dan talks about that a lot when we get into a lot of the different components for like addressing injuries, addressing what you actually have to do. But for a tendon, you have to get it moving. You have to load it, like Dan was saying. Loading it and having guardrails to be able to say, okay, well, we're going to push to this level of discomfort, but we're not going to let it get beyond that. If it does, then you have to modify the exercise to keep it inside those guardrails to make sure that we're loading it, but not beating it up too much. If you have some of the red flag stuff, like a burny, stabby, numbness, tingling, stuff that you don't feel good with, that's like an automatic modified change. Go see a physical therapist, go see a doctor, get out and make that get checked out. So pushing into pain is one of those things where it's like, for some situations, absolutely, you kind of have to dip a toe into it and have a little discomfort. For others, you're like, okay, well, this is probably not a good thing. And do I avoid pain? Sometimes you can't avoid pain. If I have a 60-year-old client with osteoarthritis, nothing we do with that joint is not going to be painful. Everything is going to hurt in one way or another, right? So it's one of those things that's like, yeah, it's going to hurt. We need to do stuff to keep the strength up, to keep the movement up. It will get better as we move it, but I'm not concerned if you're like on set 1, exercise 1, my knees are sore. Yeah, they're sore because it's bone on bone. It's going to happen no matter what we do. If by the end of set 3 on exercise 5, your knees are worse, I'm concerned about that. If they're better, that's exactly what I would want to see happen. So that's kind of, pain has to kind of teach you what to do next. And you have to have enough knowledge about it to be able to say, yeah, based on what I'm feeling, here's what I'm going to do. And that's what we try and dig into with the book.
And I know that you have examples in the book, but for people listening, and I know you can't just, prescribe an exercise or a modification to someone that you don't know much about, but what are maybe just a couple of examples that people listening might be able to incorporate into their workout? Say they're having shoulder pain, or if they're having, hip pain, something like that they can work on.
Yeah. Well, Dan did a really good job with a lot of the modification ladders. So we've included ones where it's like, okay, if a back squat bothers you, do a front squat. If a front squat bothers you, do a goblet squat. If a goblet squat bothers you, do a bench squat. So we've included a lot of ladders that show you how to adapt the exercise to meet you where you're at, but still give you a training effect and make it something that's really beneficial for you. It might not be the exact same exercise, but it gives you enough of it to make it something that's really beneficial. Sometimes an exercise just doesn't match with the person at that moment in time. That's fine. The good thing about exercise is there's so many of them out there that'll give you a benefit. You can pick and choose. You don't have to be pigeonholed into just picking one exercise.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I totally agree with Dean. To give another example, let's say bench press hurts, you can change the grip. First thing we try to do. Generally, it's changing the load somewhat. So trying to modify the RPE, the speed of the movement, increase the rep ranges. That's not working. Trying to change the grip, change the angle that you press from. That's not working. You can change the implement to a dumbbell. You can try things like push-up, some more of exercise to kind of allow the shoulder blade to use a little bit or take a little bit more of the strain and not just the joint itself. But yeah, like Dean said, we have examples for pretty much all the major pain problems and all the major lifts that become aggravating folks who like to weight train over the course of time.
Yeah,
we had some amazing models do it too. We had some amazing models and a really good photo shoot. Yeah.
Like I said, you guys do an excellent job in the book of detailing, exercises, teaching form, like you just mentioned, exercise to help with rehab, how to modify exercises. For everyone listening, maybe watching, it does have full color photos. There are sample programs in the back based on kind of maybe where you are in your skill level, your recovery process. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to be respectful of you guys' time. I know you guys are busy people, but I know there was so much excitement about this book before it came out. And now that I have it in my hands, I definitely recommend that everyone get it, whether you are a trainer, an athlete, maybe an aging retired athlete, if we can say it that way. Someone just trying to, stay healthy for longevity. So grab your copy. I really do encourage that. Rock Solid Resilience. It's available on the Human Kinetics website, also available on Amazon. I'm sure plenty of other places as well. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I will give you guys the last word here, actually, to wrap it up. If you have anything else to add, and maybe to make sure everyone knows where to follow you to keep up with all your information.
If anyone's in Canada, you can also get it at Chapters Indigo. You can also pick it up at a lot of the local bookstores in Edmonton. Audrey's Books is a great option. Other than that, Human Kinetics as the direct link. If people want to follow me, they're already here on Instagram. Follow away on my website, deansomerset.com. And I have a YouTube channel with over 700 exercise variations and demonstrations. Go on it, check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely go follow Dean. I am fitness pain free everywhere if you want to follow me. I released this book a couple weeks ago, and I just want to say thank you to everyone. Just the amount of support that we've had over the past couple of weeks has been amazing. I never expected as much support as we actually had, so I just want to say thanks so much. Definitely check out the book. We think it's good. We're biased, obviously, but it's kind of all of our experience poured into one book. It's like 300 pages, a little longer than I ever thought it was going to be, but I guess we're long-winded.
Yeah,
I think it's good stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And a big thank you to Human Kinetics for helping to publish it and get it across the finish line.